Hey there guys, welcome to my compound life. I am Jonathan. This is a channel where we build assets, we build habits, and of course we build freedom. That would be financial freedom, time freedom for you, me, and anyone else that watches my video. How are you all today? I hope everyone have a great weekend. It's good to be back. It's good to be back on Monday. Time of recording, it's around 10 a.m. in the morning, 9th of the February. So I'm based out in the UK, United Kingdom, West Midlands. So it's good to see you all. Quick disclaimer, this is not a financial or investment advice. I'm not a licensed advisor. Everything here is for education and entertainment purpose only. So it's good to see you all. Okay, so this is yet another Bitcoin daily video. So let's get started. Guys. Okay, so let's take a look at Bitcoin price today. Right now, Bitcoin is trading around 69 to 70,000. In the past 24 hours, Bitcoin certainly did pretty well. It went up small, about 2%, starting from around 69,500, hitting a high near 72,000. Near 72,000 actually, yeah. And low around 69,000. So we are about 35% away from the previous all-time high of around 126,000. Okay, so we're far away from there. Interestingly enough, we zoom out a little bit because I'll explain to you in the news section why Bitcoin pumped a little bit into the high-ish 72,000. Okay, it was mainly due to some positive news coming from Japan. But somehow, I think here's the situation with Bitcoin. We obviously cannot stay in the support area, the previous support area, right? Between 74, from 74,000 onwards, right? So even on a weekly chart, I think, rightfully we should get back up if Bitcoin can still do higher, right? Like a very important recovery after a week. And then the fact that even right until now, some of the main catalysts like Japan, can't even bring Bitcoin back to this 75,000. Essentially what I would assume, we won't be able to get back up anytime soon. So very likely, based on the weekly closing candle, it does seem once we broke the support between the zone 74 to about 80,000, if we cannot hold, right? We will continue to go down, right? And downwards essentially means I think we still have plenty of support with the 200 weeks moving average. That's around 58,200 now. That's where a lot of buying backs, a lot of buyers are stepping in as soon as we hit that target. So despite the fact that today we may have had some positive news, right? Because all to do with Japan. So we had, as soon as Asian market opened, we had a small little pump to about 72,000, right? However, I don't personally think this, we have more catalysts coming to bring us back above at least 74 to 80,000 this zone. Okay, and so if that's the case, when do we get to the bottom, right? I mean, that's constantly on my mind. So I mean, let's look at historical movement, right? So if we zoom out to weekly chart, so this was the last cycle, right? So we obviously, have this thing where we did the bottom from the last cycle where Bitcoin hit the bottom. It also touches on the 200 weeks moving average as indicated by this thin blue line. And then eventually it actually, have 3 years of bull cycle that brings Bitcoin back into the highs, right? So if we measure the high, that's sometime in November 2021, it took us approximately 31 weeks to get to, for Bitcoin price to meet the 200 weeks moving average, right? So currently, it hasn't took us 17 weeks yet, but for approximately 17 weeks, we almost hit the 200 weeks moving average, right? So we obviously hasn't touched the 200 weeks moving average. Will we touch it? I very strongly believe we will. So this is why I'm still not too bullish on the current recovery, right? Recovery back to 72,000, because it doesn't mean this is the bottom and then immediately we're going to have some sort of V-shaped recovery and then pump back up again. Because historically, I think even for Bitcoin, for the previous midterm election in the US, everything pumped except for Bitcoin. And Bitcoin will not pump until the next year, right? So this is exactly how it's playing out again, right? This will continue to be a bear year, even despite the fact that there are a lot of catalysts, maybe even more QE, more stimulus checks coming. There will definitely be some sort of rally for equity, stocks and shares in the US specifically. However, none of this will immediately cascade down into Bitcoin anytime soon. That's my thinking for now, right? So if that's the case, we obviously from all-time high get to near-ish of the 200 weeks moving average in about 17 weeks. And maybe for us to get to this 200 weeks moving average and crosses and get below it, I'd reckon maybe it takes about another 5 to 10 weeks or so, right? So essentially this will play out similarly to the last cycle. And questions will be asked once we get to the 200 weeks moving average, right? How long does it take for us to get to the bottom, right? So for the last cycle, by the time it crosses, when Bitcoin price crossed the 200 weeks moving average, it took about 21 weeks for Bitcoin to find its bottom, right? So that's about 5 months. So what are we now? So we in February. Maybe I'm thinking, maybe we'll find our Bitcoin bottom sometime during summer. And taking in the fact that we haven't touched the 200 weeks moving average, so potentially there can still be some possibility of us reaching down. So maybe get 200 weeks moving average in about 25 weeks, right? So rather than 31 weeks, we'll get there in about 25 weeks. So that's another 2 months, right? And then we'll retrace a little bit, similar to this, and then eventually hit the bottom for Bitcoin. And that will essentially mark the bottom. So if that's the case, I'm thinking maybe the bottom for Bitcoin will be sometime in summer, June, July. Okay, so that would be a pretty, can I say bull case? Because I simply just wanted to hit, I just want Bitcoin to drop to bottom ASAP so that we can get ready for the next rally, right? But so far it does seem, things are playing out 4-year cycle, but there's always the ISM cycle that, a few analysts fully believe that, Bitcoin will rally again, get back to another all-time high, or a good, at least a good dead cat bounce. Surely we will still get some of our dead cat bounce, right? However, I don't anticipate, based on the current price action, right? We can't even get back up to about 74,000 support, right? So now it became a huge resistance. And that resistance, it's not even on 75,000 anymore. The huge resistance now is at even 71,000, guys, right? This little blue line. So I reckon similar to last cycle, maybe we won't see bottom until about I don't know, June, July. But certainly last cycle, the Bitcoin bottom at around November, right? So I'm kind of thinking, in a bullish case, maybe we'll find the bottom at around June, July, and then we'll play on this rally, as opposed to finding the bottom exactly like last cycle that took about 10 months. Right? Because we look at how things change, right? 52 weeks, the last cycle to find bottom. This time round, the last cycle, it took about 39 weeks. Not 39 weeks. Hang on, let me see. Hang on, let me measure this again. Right? So the last cycle, it took about zoom in a little bit. The last cycle, it took about 52 weeks. Actually, that's the bottom, right? 3K. Yeah, this is the bottom. 52 weeks. About 52 weeks to get to the bottom. Okay, I know what's wrong now. For the last cycle, it took about 54 weeks to get to the bottom, right? So because the last cycle, the difference is, apart from getting to the bottom, it goes below the 200 weeks moving average and then further bottom, right? So 31 weeks to get to 200 weeks moving average. However, it took us approximately 10 months to stay below that 200 weeks moving average. And from the day we had the 200 weeks moving average cross, it took about 21 weeks to mark the bottom. Okay, so I simply felt maybe we'll still have similar time time frame playing out, best case would be, we'll find the bottom in June, okay, and then worst case will be totally similar to the last one, where we'll find a bottom somewhere in November. Anyway, let's not stuck into this price action for too long, because I think too many things to speculate right now. So we're kind of in the bottom discovery now, when and how much will be the bottom, I guess. Okay, so let's quickly look into fear and greed index for Bitcoin. It's extreme fear. It will continue to stay in the extreme fear for at least another few more weeks, I guess. Any rally feels like it's a manipulation of some sort by exchanges or market makers. So guys, be extremely careful about this. This is where exchanges makes a lot of money, right? They want Bitcoin price to stay low. They want it to be capped so that, people will have a lot of hopium and want to buy in, wanting to trade more on leverage long or short. This is where Bitcoin, the exchanges and market makers absolutely love this period. They can just take out the long, take out the short, make multi-million billions of dollars. So yeah, I think we're gonna have some side chops for some good period of time. We will see. Okay, so nothing to report for ETF, but let's look into the news section now. News that moves Bitcoin price section. Okay, so a lot of you may wonder, what the hell happened that caused that huge pump Bitcoin back to about 72,000, right? So that's this Takaichi triumph. Japan records 56,000 Nikkei surge sends Bitcoin to 72,000. Okay, so in Japan, the stock market hit a new high at 56,000 on Nikkei index, which is like their main stock gauge, by the way. So Prime Minister SANAE Takaichi is staking her political future on turning 60 to 80% approval ratings into a parliamentary majority that could fast-track crypto reforms. So markets are now watching closely for signals on crypto taxes, stablecoin rules, and legal clarity as Japan heads to the polls, right? So this happened after... So this obviously happened, and after positive economic news, policy changes, Nikkei immediately bounced. Okay, so yeah, I think the Prime Minister, she's a strong politician in Japan. This new policy win change and boosted the Japanese stock market, Nikkei. And so this surge might come from better economic plans, like making exports cheaper with a weaker yen, or more spending to grow the economy. Well, at least the Japanese economy. So now about Japan, whether the Japanese government bond yield would have any implication because of this. These are the interest rate Japan needs to pay on its debt, right? So in a booming stock market like this, yields could go up because investors think the economy is heating up and maybe leading to inflation. So the Bank of Japan might raise rates to cool it down further, right? But if the surge is from keeping money loose and yield lows, it keeps the yen weak, helping exporters too in Japan. So implication on this headline, I think obviously Bitcoin felt pretty good. It went up. And then even gold went up too, right? This kind of grabs a very positive, exciting feeling type of market sentiment, especially Bitcoin recently dropped to about 60,000. But it also hints at possible changes in money flow worldwide. So for bond yield, if they rise, it might pull money into Japan, making the yen stronger and reducing easy money elsewhere. So this will affect liquidity, how much cash is floating around for investing in. If liquidity tightens because yields go up, it could make borrowing harder, right? So previously, I've kind of covered some of the news that the U.S. Federal Reserve might watch if the yen gets too strong or weak. If yen weakens a lot from low yields, it hurts U.S. companies competing with Japan. So the Fed or the U.S. Treasury could help by buying more yen to support it and adding more dollars into the system for liquidity. But usually, this kind of support, this kind of intervention will only be done in Japan, not from the US. So what does it mean for us as holders, right? For Bitcoin, obviously we want our Bitcoin price to pump, right? So if we're holding Bitcoin, more global liquidity from intervention will always be good. But as I've mentioned earlier, it may not come, right? Usually Japan would want to do that sort of intervention. So based on this news headline, I think short term it's bullish because stock surges, Bitcoin, gold, everything kind of surge, which is good, right? So money is pouring in and at the same time pouring into crypto and Bitcoin too. But for longer term, I think can be even more bullish if low yields and weaker yen lead to more global liquidity as easy money kind of flows to assets like Bitcoin. But if the yield actually rise and Fed doesn't step in, tighter liquidity might be bearish, pressuring price to go further down, right? Which I think will and may be that case, right? So as long as Japan keeps policy loose without hiking rates anymore, liquidity stays high, boosting Bitcoin. If they tighten, of course, to control inflation from the boom, it could reduce liquidity and hurt Bitcoin price pretty badly. Okay, so yeah, I think we're just gonna have to see. I think anyhow, this is a slow pump, right? Because previously Japanese rates gone up, so as a result, the more money are pouring into Japan, more selling off from the carry trade to pay back loans. So these are some slight positive news that came out from Japan after the recent Japanese carry trade unwind, right? But of course, we haven't seen the extent of the unwind. And at the same time, it does seem the rate will continue to stay up if that's the case. So we'll see how that goes. I think at least for the unwind, it's coming to an end. I think recently I've reported that why Bitcoin price dropped to about 60K last week. One of the key factor was actually, the Asia Japanese trade unwind from some hedge fund, so resulting that they have to sell off their Bitcoin. So we'll see. We'll see how this plays out. Okay, other headlines. I think that can potentially move Bitcoin price. China urges banks to cut U.S. Treasuries holding. So here's some big news from China. So officials there are telling their big banks to reduce how much they hold in the U.S. Treasuries, which are like the safe government bonds from the U.S. So this happened in recent weeks before a talk between both leaders, Trump and President Xi. So for folks new to this, U.S. Treasuries are investment where you kind of lend money to the U.S. government, and they're usually seen as very, very safe. But now China worries about too much focus on them, and market goes ups and downs, right? And so they're not touching the government's own holding. However, China are advising banks to buy less new ones and sell some if they have too many in terms of the US treasuries. So China banks holdings have dropped over the years to a pretty low point. And I think implication on such a headline, this news gives cautious. We're worried feeling about the US bonds, showing less trust in them as safe spots, maybe because of US policy changes under Trump. So this is why, at least in China and the rest of the world, people are buying gold instead of anything else. And what's in it for us if we hold Bitcoin, right? So especially for Bitcoin or asset holder, it could shake up global money flows since China is a huge player in buying the US debts. And if banks sell treasuries, bonds prices might fall, okay? And pushing interest rates higher, which affect borrowing costs everywhere else. So short term, it's causing a lot of uncertainty with volatility, right? Like how I've reported the Japan, the positive news coming out from Japan. Although Bitcoin and gold rise, I think the positive news from Japan leads to Bitcoin rise. But at the same time, it's this kind of news, like China advising not to buy U.S. treasuries. So that's where they could be sell off, and investors would rather be positioning themselves into gold. So that's why this would be more of a news that causes gold to surge, right? But I think overall, long term, it can still be bullish if this is the case, as this is kind of leads to more market stress. The Fed might do more quantitative easing, and that's what we hope. That's what we've been hoping for since last year, right? So how many times have we spoke about possible quantitative easing that never quite happened? I mean, it happened, no doubt, but we simply need a sure amount of money printing. And this can essentially be the type of trigger that leads the US Fed into more quantitative easing, like money printing to buy back their bonds, and which floods the system with cash, often boosting risk asset like Bitcoin if selling causes big yield spike or economic slowdown in the US Fed can potentially steps in with quantitative easing to ease liquidity. So we need this QE, right? So let's pray that QE comes. But even if it does come, it's not going to be anytime soon, guys. So I simply felt, let just wait for Bitcoin to find its bottom. Every pump without this massive amount of QE, essentially it's just another dead cat bounce, right? So watch out for that. Don't be too bullish. Don't go all in if you guys are DCAing in, And other interesting news section. This one is very, very interesting. $44 billion Bitcoin blunder puts South Korea regulators on alert over local crypto exchange. So I've also reported this, I think over the weekend actually, like what caused the sharp drop of Bitcoin, 60,000 drop of Bitcoin. And one of the possible reasons is because of this, right? Where the big South Korean exchange, Bithumb, accidentally gave out billions in Bitcoin instead of small reward. Of course, Bithumb obviously recovered most, but it caused the price to drop to $60,000. Okay. And now, because of Bithumb's error, I keep wanting to call it Big Thumbs, but it's Bithumb error, it sparks Korea's crackdown on crypto, right? Because South Korea's regulators plan to actively investigate market manipulation in crypto this year. Officials are targeting price manipulation tactic used by large traders and exchanges. So these include whale pumping, fake prices support, and sudden mass buy spikes. And essentially, exchanges, market makers will try and take out leverage long and short. Okay, so the move follows Bithumb's accidental 620,000 Bitcoin transfer, which briefly sent Bitcoin down to about 60,000. Specifically for this Bithumb exchange, it went down to about $55,000. Okay. And the funny thing is, Bithumb, they actually made up this 620,000 Bitcoin because these are fake Bitcoin. So, while they are obviously mentioned it's a system glitch. So the system glitch let Bithumb distribute 620,000 Bitcoin that never existed on the blockchain. Because in the blockchain, it only recorded that this exchange had approximately 175 Bitcoin on its own book and 42,619 Bitcoin for customers. Yet its ledger treated fake coin as real. So yeah, I think this is why, guys, this is why, it's kind of also an explanation why we never had that parabolic move back in October last year. Bitcoin did so well. We almost hit 127,000, but the whole thing got stopped because I reckon a lot of these exchanges, market makers are manipulating. They're trying to take out longs and shorts. And that all lead to, all of this non-existing Bitcoin that eventually crash when leverage were taken out, right? So this is why, guys, don't hold too much Bitcoin or crypto in the exchanges. Make sure that you transfer them out. In the event that crypto exchanges does go down, they're going to take all of your Bitcoin with them, right? A little bit like Mt. Gox a while back. A little bit like FTX exchange from the last cycle. So yeah, bear that in mind, guys. Other news. Bring you some hopium, guys. Binance continue to buy more Bitcoin when the rest of the world are frightened, they're selling because of bear market. Yeah, so I've got a few friends that came to me and say, oh, Bitcoin's price dropped so much. I don't want to touch Bitcoin, man. Thank goodness I didn't touch Bitcoin. I'm like, guys, this is like the time that you guys need to be aware of Bitcoin, because there's no better time that you should pay attention to Bitcoin than now, right? So now's the time. And yeah, if we don't stack more Bitcoin than we can right now, eventually we're gonna miss out on this on this ride. So at least when the rest of the world are afraid, the weekends, let's not use paper hand on weekends. When most simply just want to sell because they're frightened, this is where Binance starts stepping in, right? So Binance SAFU funds, they bought another 4,225 Bitcoin. So now that specific fund held over 10,455 Bitcoin. Okay. And what they do, right? So they are shifting all of their stable coin into buying Bitcoin. Okay, and calling it a SAFU fund, right? However, this is essentially just buying the dip, because Bitcoin is dipping, and then they've got $1 billion worth of fund that's doing nothing, right? The yield is not going to even be good, right? So that's why it makes sense, rather than having stable coin that leaves lying around that doesn't have a lot of interest from it, makes absolute sense to buy more Bitcoin, buy the dip. That's what Binance is doing. And they started buying this dip a lot more earlier because they kind of see that as an opportunity, based on how things we are seeing, Bitcoin drop almost to the 200 weeks moving average. Took about 17 weeks so far, right? However, it could get another few more weeks before we touch the bottom. So this is where Binance started doing their DCA in early, because they are seeing, compared to previous 31 weeks to get to 200 weeks moving average, this time around it could be 20 something weeks. Okay. And of course they are constantly buying more dips whenever they've been given the opportunity, because when Bitcoin in a bear market, the price will definitely go down, right? And then for their fund, they want to hold up to $1 billion worth of Bitcoin. So that's why when Bitcoin dips, well, at least it dips below $800 million worth, Binance going to top it up. And they're going to constantly topping it up back to about 1 billion. And that's their pledge on buying the dip, right? So by the time when Bitcoin come back in full recovery, which it always does, right? So essentially Binance is just buying heavily during this, this dip, right? So they started, obviously, if we kind of compare to last year, they pledged that $1 billion is what we want to buy for Bitcoin. And then they started slightly earlier. They want to catch as much of this dip period as possible. Whenever it dips even more, they're going to top it up so that by this period ends, right? When we actually get back to, when the bear market ends, right? So the last cycle, it obviously bottomed at around November, right? When it get back up to the 200 weeks moving average, I think that will be the time where Binance would be, okay, enough of the Bitcoin buying, right? They're gonna start to slowly DCA back into stablecoin, right? So that's when they would try to take a lot of the profits. Wow, imagine that, right? So they're not going to sell, and then they're going to sell and transfer all of that SAFU fund back into stable coins, right? So during that time, maybe Bitcoin gone to about, at least for Binance, maybe 3 or 4x. That will be about $4 billion made. And what Binance will do, they'll sell all of their Bitcoin back into stablecoin. They'll keep that $3 billion as profit and continue to have that $1 billion as SAFU fund. Clever, right? But anyway, enough of Binance, enough of Hopium. I hope you guys are well. I hope you guys haven't, I hope many of you guys still in the market, because this will be the time. So what happened to me was, I think in my first cycle, this is my third cycle at least, right? In my first Bitcoin cycle, as soon as we hit the bear market, as soon as Bitcoin started to drop, I just left. I just left the market. And no one ever told me that, hey, Jonathan, this is the time you need to stay in the market and dollar cost average the hell out, to get to a better average, right? I did the same thing again, because of media, because everyone was talking about Bitcoin. I got into my second cycle at the top again, right? And then ever since I learned about, damn, Bitcoin, it's a 4-year cycle, right? So I never even read charts, right? I never actually knew what the hell is going on most of the time, right? Like, these are essentially just 4-year cycle here, 4-year cycle here, right? I never actually gotten into looking all of these trends. By the time I kind of learned about it, I was like, so by the time I actually learned more about Bitcoin was when I was somewhere here, right? And I was like DCAing in from top to bottom and then back to top again. So I definitely caught some, cheap Bitcoin at around 30K, right? And of course, by the time I got there, I was like, you know what? I know Bitcoin will continue to drop, and this will be a painful 1 year of bear, which was the right decision. 1 year of bear, and then with 3 years of bull market, and then we're now heading into the bear market again. So this is why I'm letting all my viewers, letting all my friends. Some of my friends probably won't even want to be my friends anymore, by the way. So this would be the time to stay strong and just to DCA in, right? A little bit like Binance. If Binance are like DCAing in, I don't see why we shouldn't. This is where, this area now, I think could be the low. Mind you, we could always fell another 20-30% back to somewhere, I don't know, 47,000-50,000, right? If that's the low, right, it will continue to be the low for another few months, right? This will be like the best time to DCA. Totally get some people that we love to DCA on a daily basis, right? If that's the case, if that's your game, do that, right? Or otherwise, stack up some cash, reduce your DCA a little bit on a daily basis. Just, maybe half DCA, half just stack it up, and be prepared to buying at the low, which I think somehow the 200 weeks moving average, hitting it and then going below it can potentially be marking the bottom for Bitcoin. So yeah, I think just hang in there, guys. Hang in there. And I will see you guys in the next video. So if you like the video, which I haven't really been talking about too much, hit the like, hit subscribe, help me out, get me to 1,000 subs. I think an undisclosed source told me that by the time I get to 1,000 subs, we'll essentially be out of the bear market. Okay, so I will see you in the next video. Okay, bye guys. Bye.